name's Kirk Cameron. I am an ex-atheist. You know, I used to think that atheism was intellectual, and I wanted to be looked at as an intellectual. But in truth, all I had was blind faith in atheism and in what my science teacher told me and my other atheist friends.
So, Kirk Cameron used to have faith in atheism, whatever that means. And for some strange reason his science teacher used to tell him about atheism. We'll examine what he said about atheism and science in a minute, but for now, I'll focus on his statement about having faith in atheism. It reminds me of a book that I came across last year by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and a video by the YouTube user Empty Without Jesus by the same name as the book. In the information box he says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Everywhere you look, you see intelligent design. Do you really think you came from O pool of slimy ooze? That's why it's called the theory of evolution. Your faith amazes me. And that brings us to the eighth lie Christians tell and why they tell it. That atheism requires faith. The lie can't be summed up much more neatly than that. The idea is that faith is a necessary requirement of atheism, or that one needs to have faith in order to be an atheist. But here are the facts. Once you properly define the terms atheism and faith, it becomes immediately apparent that atheism can't have anything to do with faith. Atheism means not believing in any gods, and faith is the belief that a proposition is true without any evidence that this proposition is true. The former is not believing in something. The latter is believing in something in the absence of evidence. But in case some people decide to be deliberately obtuse, I'll spell it out even more clearly. When it comes to gods, atheism, and faith, you can define things along two dimensions, one of belief and one of evidence. Starting with the belief dimension, if you believe in gods, it's fair to call that a belief. And if you don't, it's fair to call that a non-belief. The other dimension to consider is that of evidence. If your evidence and your beliefs line up, then you're being rational, sane, and honest. In other words, if you believe in something and you have evidence for that thing, that is a rational belief. Similarly, if you don't believe in something and you don't have evidence for that thing, that is a rational non-belief. If your beliefs and your evidence don't line up, then you're being irrational or dishonest. In other words, if you believe in something and you don't have evidence for it, that's an irrational belief. Similarly, if you don't believe in something even though you have evidence for that thing, that's an irrational non-belief. Which of these boxes represents atheism? That's easy. Atheism is not believing in gods, and there is no evidence that any gods exist. So atheism is rational non-belief. Which one of these boxes represents faith? That's also easy. Faith is defined as belief without evidence, so faith would be irrational belief. And what about Empty Without Jesus, who claims that there is evidence for some God? Well, even if he was right, which he isn't, atheism still wouldn't have anything to do with faith. It would instead be dependent on denial. So no, properly defined, atheism and faith don't have anything to do with each other. In fact, even if you take the view that atheism means the belief that no gods exist, a definition that is, in my opinion, inaccurate and unnecessarily restrictive, it still doesn't require faith to be an atheist. Here's why. Consider the belief and evidence dimensions again, this time with respect to unicorns. And this time we'll say that people in the yes column believe in unicorns, and that people in the no column go further than just not believing in unicorns to believing that unicorns don't exist. Most sane, rational people, and even most Christians, would admit that while believing in unicorns would take faith, or belief without evidence, believing that unicorns do not exist would not take faith. Even if the person who believed that no unicorns exist couldn't prove that no unicorns exist. This is because asking for proof of non-existence is an unfair and dishonest tactic, a ploy used by people who know that you can't prove that anything doesn't exist, and that this indicates absolutely nothing, but nonetheless use this dishonest tactic to support belief in their favorite superstition. So no, Even if someone believed that unicorns did not exist, they wouldn't have faith in the non-existence of unicorns. A complete lack of evidence of the existence of unicorns is enough to justify their belief that no unicorns exist. And in the same way that a complete lack of evidence for unicorns justifies the belief that no unicorns exist, a complete lack of evidence for gods justifies the belief that no gods exist. In both cases, it's still not faith, just reason. But what about Kirk's science teacher and those remarks by MT without Jesus? What they're trying to do is to assert that atheism is dependent on some other scientific belief, and then say that these beliefs are dependent on faith. But of course they're wrong on both counts. I won't bother explaining the inherent irony in claiming that scientific beliefs are faith-based, but I will point out that atheism is not dependent on any scientific belief. Not on evolution, not on the belief in a round Earth, not on the belief in a heliocentric solar system, and not on the germ theory of disease. Atheism long predated all of those scientific discoveries, and there are still many atheists today who don't necessarily believe in any of those things. Atheism is dependent on one thing and one thing alone: the fact that there is no evidence for the existence of any gods. That's it. So the truth is that, while theism or believing in unsubstantiated gods requires faith, atheism, or not believing in unsubstantiated gods, simply doesn't require faith. Christians tell this lie because there's no evidence that any God exists, so they have to rely entirely on faith to support their beliefs. And even though they applaud their own faith and claim that it's a wonderful thing that makes them more righteous than other people, even Christians know that faith is no more than gullibility dressed up as a virtue, and used by people who want you to uncritically accept their ideas because they have no real support for these ideas. Faith is dumb. Everybody knows this, even Christians. Because if you'd willingly believe one entirely unsubstantiated thing, what's to stop you from believing any number of other entirely unsubstantiated things? Faith goes against truth and against reason, and even Christians know it. But since they can't provide any better reason than faith to accept their beliefs, since they have no evidence for anything they say, some of them try to pretend that it takes as much faith, or more faith, to not accept their unsubstantiated claims as it takes to accept their unsubstantiated claims. They know it's not true, but they say it anyway. But for those of you who really have difficulty grappling with the idea, ask yourselves this: how much faith does it take to not believe in unicorns? How much faith does it take to not believe in leprechauns? How much faith does it take to not believe in gremlins? When you've honestly answered those questions, you'll know exactly how much faith it takes to not believe in gods. If you know of a lie that Christians like to tell, please send me a message with that lie and I'll make a video about it. Other than that, please rate the video, subscribe, and wait for more. There's more coming.